This is Lauren Mills recording Bart Mills for MUCT 1250. Hello, Bart.
Hello, Lauren.
Okay, when and how did you first become interested in music?
I grew up in, a family that my father had been a musician when he was young. He became a cop later, so there were always musical instruments around when I was a kid. I first started to play music. My first instrument was the mandolin. My father taught me about four chords on the mandolin, and it was small, and I was little, so I had little fingers, and it worked out real well. So I learned to play the mandolin a little bit. Um, and then probably around, that was probably 8 or 9 years old. And I started playing and just doing what 8 or 9 year olds do. And then as I grew older, my interest evolved and my opportunities evolved. So about the age of 12 or 13 is when, like a lot of kids, I really attached myself to it. I got my first guitar for my birthday, and I got the John Denver Big Note Songbook, which was this great book. It had all the chords in there and had notes, and it basically just taught you how to play guitar to those songs that back then in the early 70s everybody knew. And so I locked myself in the room with my $100 guitar and a John Denver Big Note Songbook and taught myself to play guitar a little bit. Eventually, I took lessons from my fourth grade teacher, Mr. Rohrball, was my guitar teacher. And then I started. We had a piano in the house when I was a kid, so I started to teach myself to play piano a little bit. And again, in that one, I got a copy of Billy Joel's The Stranger album, the Big Note Songbook for that one, and it taught you basic 1-4-5 progressions in piano chords and things like that. So I learned to play that way, and then eventually I got good enough or interested enough that we paid for some piano lessons for me as well. So um, by the time I was in high school, I was pretty active in choir. I learned that I was a fairly decent singer. I was in the All Ohio State Fair Youth Choir, and then got to go to Europe with that. So a lot of opportunities came around. And then, of course, I figured out that girls like guitar players. So I was in a band. I started my first band, Feedback, which was a great band name because we only had one amplifier and we could only afford the 3-foot cords. So there was actually a lot of feedback because all our instruments were plugged into the same amp. So then I decided eventually, originally I was going to go to Cincinnati University to be a musical theater major. And I never thought for a second that I wouldn't get in because I was the best singer in my high school. It turns out that all the kids that go to audition are the best singers in their high schools, and they also could dance and do theory. So I failed my audition at Cincinnati, and it turned out to be a good thing because musical theater really wasn't my forte. I went on to Bowling Green and studied music education, got my bachelor's degree there, and that is where I studied with Andres Polomenos, and I learned that I had a decent voice for opera, and that's went on from there.
Okay, what are your musical influences?
Again, a wide variety. Those early ones that I talk about, guys like John Denver, who were big influences on every kid who wanted to sit down and sing with a guitar. And then later in life, you had the Elton Johns and the Billy Joels that were pop musicians who, that was your piano guys. And you could sit around and learn a few piano chords and sing and impress the ladies and play at the Masonic Lodge and make a little cash on the side. I had a very engaging high school music director. Harold Beckett was my choir director. Not only did he get me my first gig, we did Music Man when I was in high school, and I was in the barbershop quartet. And so he got us a couple of jobs with that quartet afterward, and we started to learn that you could make a little money on this. Our band name was, by the way, The Class Ring. And so we did, we had about a 45-minute show that we'd take around to nursing homes and churches and Masonic lodges. Old people loved us, and so we made a little money. Harold also got me my first voiceover job. I used to do voiceover in high school for local WCIT radio. And then of course when I got to college, I had very good music teachers. I was influenced there because there I got to hear a whole lot of other types of music, not only on campus but off campus. I discovered reggae by hanging out at Howard's Club H. I learned. I started hanging out with some of the bands that would come around and sitting in with them. I was fortunate that I played a lot of different instruments, and I had a fairly good capacity to pick up new instruments. So one time I actually toured with a rock band playing the baritone. So it was, just a lot of different influences over the years. And even today, I mean, I'm 50 years old, but I like to think that I'm still open to new influences in music. I don't play as much as I do, but I certainly still enjoy listening and seeing bands and hearing new things.
Okay, does anyone in your family play music?
Well, you were a very good quality clarinetist in high school. You dropped out a little earlier than I would have liked, but you were certainly had great skills, as did your sister, who was probably the family's greatest tuba player. My father, your grandfather, came from a very musical family. Now he was the youngest in his family and was the one that didn't actually do it professionally at any point. But his father had been a professional musician and played at a variety of different places. He was from Ireland, so he played there. But when they came over, he actually worked in the movie theater in town, and would play organ and piano and violin and everything else. And then my dad's family had a family band, the Mills family band, that played around quite a bit around Indiana and Ohio for years when that was during the Depression, and your grandpa was growing up. So he was the youngest, so he was just there to be cute mostly. But he certainly had a unique capacity for music. He had learned to play mandolin and piano and clarinet, and so um, he always had the important thing was he liked music, so he supported the music that I wanted to do. B, he was open-hearted about music, so he didn't really have an attitude about. He was never one of those people that told me the music I listened to was stupid. And was I going A B C A B, and then C would be that there were instruments around, and they weren't precious things. I was able to pick up an instrument, the clarinet that was his grandfather's, which I still have today. It was always there, and so if I wanted to learn to play clarinet, I could pick it up and play with it. And nobody ever told me that I needed to take lessons before I learned to play. So I learned to play and then took lessons. Developed some bad habits along the way, and had to correct them later or hang on to them. But it was because my father had come from a musical family, even though he wasn't necessarily a musician himself. It opened the gate for me considerably.
What kinds of times and places have you played music in your life?
Well, again, I started off in the church like a lot of kids did, and that was the first place I ever soloed, sang in the church choir, and then did some solos as a kid. Then, as I got older, I played in rock bands in high school. I played in barbershop quartets. I did musical theater. Went on to college, and I did the same thing. I was in collegiate chorale. I was in the men's chorus for a brief period. I started doing opera at Bowling Green. I was in operas there and in Toledo. I did summer residencies at Central City and Santa Fe operas. After I left college, I continued to sing a little opera here and there, but I moved over to musical theater. I found out that the operas, I was a little short and not quite as powerful as I needed to be for opera. So I did a lot of musical theater then. Did some touring. There was a group that toured originally out of Detroit. I worked with them for about 3 years right out of college and did a variety of touring shows with them in different roles. Then finally came back and settled down into the newspaper business and sort of stopped. So around now, I don't perform that much anymore.
What else do you do besides play music?
Well, I spent 20 years as a journalist. I also run the Council for the Arts of Greater Lima, and I have a marketing and communications consultancy. So the music kind of opened things up because it made me a little fearless about going into other professions. So then I spent quite a few years in journalism because really I've always said that writing and music are pretty similar mindsets. So I did that for a lot of years, and as I said, now I actually make a real living in marketing and communications.
What types of music do you prefer to sing?
I still like musical theater. I love spirituals. I mean, I'm a middle-aged white guy, so it sometimes looks a little awkward, but I do, and I've got a big low voice, so the spirituals lend themselves to what I can do these days. I was too lazy to keep up with my opera singing, so it's very difficult for me to do oratorio or opera anymore. It takes a lot more time to get ready for something. And mostly what I do anymore is just sit around with my guitar or the piano and play whatever music I pick up and listen to and like to do. So a lot of singer-songwriter stuff, some folk music, stuff like that.
Do you have any education in music?
I do. I have a bachelor's degree in music education from Bowling Green State University. I also, of course, took years and years of different lessons off and on. So I had piano lessons, I had guitar lessons, I studied mandolin for a little bit to see if I could get any better, which I couldn't. I did quite a bit of, I did a lot of choral work, so I worked with some great choral directors and took some of that. So that's the extent of it.
Um, what has music taught you?
Well, it's certainly first off, I always argue that it teaches you discipline. It really taught me that you only get better if you work at it, and that's the same thing with everything. Um, it also teaches me a really valuable lesson, which is, and more being a music teacher later in life than it was being a musician, is that the first adage that you only get better if you work at it is true, but there's a second adage that is you're only good if you were born good. You can't, as a singer especially, but even as a musician across the board, there is something that you're born with that makes you better musician than the people you're competing with. And if you're not born with it, I mean, you can still take great joy in music, you can still perform music, you can still enjoy it, and you may find later in life that there's a music style that maybe you found your soul in. But if you're not born with it, you're paddling for fun. You're never going to be at the top of the rung. It's just like being an athlete or anything else. The other thing is, I learn about other cultures through music. I really have. I've met a whole lot of different people. I've traveled all over Europe and Eastern Europe. I've been to Jamaica. I've been all over the world, and a lot of the communications that I've had with people have been through music. So it gave me an opportunity to meet different types of people with different interests, people certainly of different socioeconomic groups. I mean, to start with, when I started musical theater and opera, every kid in the group was, I was a Cops kid from Lima, Ohio. So every kid in the group was much more, they came from better families. They were wealthier families, not better families ever.
Mm-hmm.
But they came from wealthier families. They came from a lot more training. They had a lot more experience in their schools. So that was a good opportunity for me to really meet new people. And then later in life, when I started doing rock and started getting involved with, found an interest and a love for reggae and things like that, I met, again, a whole new world of people that, it's made me more accepting and entertained by people. And now as a director for the Council for the Arts, all the bands that we've brought in over the years, I mean, you as a kid got to hang out with a Gullah kinfolk and, the whole family of Gullah musicians, or the Japanese bamboo ensembles that we brought through and things like that. So, we've always had an opportunity to really just have them in our homes and meet with them and engage with them. And so music has been the sort of door opener for us to a lot of different cultures and people.
Who's your favorite musician and why?
Well, that's a toughie. One part of me would say that I probably ought to pick some great classical performer, but at its core, I'm still an Elvis Costello fan. Always will be. Always have been, because he's got the full combination of things. He's a great lyricist. He's got soul. He's written amazing music across about 40-year career, and he's just super cool. And super cool is kind of at 50, it's something I hang on to.
Okay, and if you could redo one musical experience, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. If I could redo one musical experience, what would it be? To relive it would be the first time I ever played in college. I was in a band called The Exchange, and we had a really pretty front man. He was very popular with the ladies, and he was a good high singer. And we did a lot of Cure and Smiths and Husker Du, and just a lot of a variety of music. And the first time that we ever played out, and it was actually at Milton's, which was probably it's the Easy Street now, but it was upstairs at Milton's. And that feeling is the first time you're in first off, it was a good band. We were really good players, and we were really popular. And that feeling is pretty great. And it's hard to replicate that.
Thanks for this interview.
No, I appreciate it. I hope it works out for you. Your teacher should give you a really good grade because you're smart and you're pleasant and you're good to people and puppies and old people.